And a couple there in the US. I'll say good evening. As we get started, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners and custodians of the lands on which we meet today, the peoples of the Kulin Nation. I also pay my respects to their elders past and present and any on the call today. Again, welcome to this webinar that Global Victoria are hosting, myself, the banking options in the US. So my name's Adrian Percy. I'm the Senior Trade Manager at Global Victoria for the Americas. And you may have seen me or come across me in your travels in the past, supporting companies, or even with the capital raising webinar series we ran last year, which I know a number of people attended, and I can see some names on the call today. So just a little bit of background. There may be some new people here, so just for context, Global Victoria, we're the trade facilitation agency of the Victorian government, supporting Victorian exporters expand their presence overseas. And this webinar and my remit is the Americas in general, being the US, Latin America, and Canada. So obviously, this webinar that we've set up is specifically focused on the US. And from that end, reason why this is a topical webinar is as we work with companies based in Victoria that are heading overseas, as they expand and go through their journey and life cycle of growing in the States. Obviously, setting up a presence in the market is very important, and choosing the right banking partner is very, very important as well, to make sure that it's easy in terms of a transaction for yourself and your respective clients. And it is a question that we often see, like, who should we go with? What do we need to consider? And so the more of those sort of questions that come through, it gives us the impetus to really push and make sure we get out the relevant content and insights for companies to make that correct decision. So just a bit of format for today. We've got three panelists who you would have seen on the communication that have gone out, and I'll introduce them one by one in a little bit more detail when it's their time to present. But we've got Blair Lucas from Acclime Group, Tammy Olmstead from Airwallex, and Sara Rona from Silicon Valley Bank. Before we go into the formalities, I would like to introduce my colleague based in San Francisco, Brian Carnahan, the Senior Trade Director for Victoria, the Victorian government based out there in the US. So Brian, I'll hand over to you and give a brief intro if you can.
Sure. Thanks, Adrian. It's nice to see so many people on the screen today, and I know several of you. I've worked with some of you over the years, so it's really nice to do this. And it's a part of a series that we're doing to try to give companies understanding of what they need to do to prepare for different aspects of coming into the U.S. market. We've expanded, when I say we, the Victoria government's expanded in the last year. We've now have 7 sector-specific trade managers based around the U.S., and they're all in place in specific sectors to support companies in their journey to exports here to the U.S. And so we're always welcome to talk with any companies at any time, wherever your journey may be. The best way to contact us is either probably Adrian directly, since you probably all have his email contacts. But I do know several of our trade managers are on the video call today. So we welcome the inquiries wherever your journey is, to see what we can do to assist you here in the US and Canada as we go forward. But anyway, feel free to reach out to us at any time. Thanks, Adrian.
Thank you, Brian. Okay, we'll get started. You've probably heard enough of my voice, seen enough of my face, and that's definitely not why you're here today. So just in terms of a little bit of housekeeping, as we go through the presentations, and as I mentioned, we'll have 3 of them, I will ask that you turn off your screen and your mic, of course, just so no interruptions. There will be slides for all 3 presentations, so we'll have that up on screen. Obviously, presenters, keep your camera on so people can see you talking as well. And as we go through, just use the chat function if you have any questions. Just type it in there and I'll monitor that as we go through. And the aim is that we'll have some time at the end to go through those. So whatever's in there, I'll raise it at the end, but I will also open it up for questions as we go to the question and answer session. So without further ado, I will introduce Blair Lucas, the Group Commercial Director of Acclime, a good friend of ours, very supportive of the work we do. And Blair, I will hand over to you and just tell me when you want me to pop the slides on the screen.
Thank you, Adrian. Good to see you, Brian. Yes, thanks for everybody turning up to take part in this presentation. It is, to give you some background into why this is so interesting and so important, when we were looking to expand our services into the US, we were trying to find out what was the most challenging pain point for companies going to the US, and surprise, surprise, it was banking. And this really was the crucible in which we developed our service package to help companies to the US, because if you can solve the bank account problem, everything can be solved. So it's good that we have the two partners that we work very, very closely with in a commercial capacity here on this call, representing two different ends of the spectrum in many ways of banking opportunities, because it is a very dynamic and very vibrant space. And you'll find that the solutions that I'm sure my learned colleagues of Sara and Tammy will speak to here are not only useful at various stages of your growth and development, but in fact can both be useful. And to that end, we have both digital bank accounts and bricks and mortar bank accounts at Acclime ourselves, because the solutions they offer, the difference in opportunities and functionality that they can offer, are really suitable at various stages of your journey, if not thereon. So what I'll speak about today is not about what they can do. I just wanted, which I'm going to let them do, because it's probably everything I've got information about that's probably out of date anyway. So I'll let them speak to what they can do as banks, but I'll talk to you about what we've, some of the fundamentals about getting into the United States to the point where you can get a bank account, but also some of the challenges that we've encountered along the way with various solutions that might be available. Myself, Blair Lucas, Group Commercial Director for Acclime. I was one of the two co-founders of Acclime Australia in 2011 when we were supporting companies at that stage coming into the Australian market. And in 2018, or 2017 might have been, went to South by Southwest looking for US companies to come to Australia, and instead found this huge unmet need, particularly then of Victorian companies who were looking to set up a presence in the US, and that led to us launching our services to support companies that are scaling into the United States. All right, we can do the slides now. That's my little background. Thank you, Adrian. I did send you an updated PDF, because sometimes the formatting can be weird, so just share the PDF. We should be good. Please. Bingo. Now I know it's a PDF. I'm sorry. The PowerPoints look better, but the formatting and everything goes all weird. So apologies about that. Next slide. All right, these are the things we always talk about, the 9 sort of dot points, the things you should be aware of when going to the US. Number one, it doesn't have to be complicated. It looks and sounds very complicated because the United States is very large and very complicated. All right. You're dealing with 50 countries, and I come back to that a lot. And you've got to think about the mentality of dealing with 50 countries, not one country, because the states are, in essence, their own legal jurisdictions with really strong rights that they've retained since independence, unlike Australia, where we've given all those rights up to the federal government. But it doesn't have to be complicated. 95% of our clients adopt exactly the same entry strategy to get into the US, because it's the simplest, most cost-effective, most tax-efficient way to do so. So, yeah, try to cut out all the noise, try to focus on solutions, and you'll find it's actually quite simple. Because if you try to find the best way of doing it, you'll hear 50 different ways and you never work out which way to do it. There is a simple way to do it. Next slide, please. We talk about why register a company in the US. And look, I talk myself out of a bit of business in this space, because you often, depending on the nature of your business, let's say you're a SaaS company with no operations inside the US, no people, no product being hosted on servers, no business activities whatsoever. You can pretty much engage in trade, at least at the outset, very effectively without having an entity in the US. There will come a point at where there'll be a trigger, a decision point that will require you to have that entity there. But sometimes you don't need that entity in the US, at least to start to access the market. And I talk about 2 buckets of reasons why we do this, hard facts and soft facts. hard facts. Look at that, bank accounts right at the top. If you want a bricks and mortar bank account, you need an entity in the US. You know, it's the easiest way to do it is definitely to have a US entity with a bank account. Now, some of our partners here may have other ways around that, but in general, I can see Sara's already frowning at me. In general, we find that most of the banks want to have that entity registered underneath a US entity. So that's why we are oftentimes putting the entities on the ground there, because they need a high street bank account with a bricks and mortar bank. Of course, you don't necessarily need that if you have Airwallex, but you know, oftentimes a bank account will be driving the necessity to have an entity on the ground. Taxes, definitely. If you are an Australian company doing business inside the United States, carrying on a business in the United States, extending your Australian business operations into the United States, you are exposing yourself to what we call permanent establishment risk, whereby the IRS, the US tax authorities, will say your Australian company is doing business in the US and therefore it's taxable on its worldwide income. So by putting an entity in the US and quarantining your US business operations to your US entity, that entity is taxable in the US and your Australian company isn't. So that is often a real key driver here. You know, things that will drive definitions around permanent establishment are employees. You know, if you're employing somebody in the US from your Australian company who's acting for the Australian company and developing business, doing business, you are creating that permanent establishment tax risk. If that person's employed by a US subsidiary, you're not. Okay. Quarantine warranties and liabilities, regulatory requirements, engaging with government, all of these things which are very similar here to Australia. You know, if you want to apply for a US government tender, you're going to need to have a US entity with an employer identification number on the ground so that it has the credentials to be eligible for working with those government authorities. But the soft facts are often where I come down to we are non-quantitative, they're qualitative, but I think they're really important, which is if you want to demonstrate your real intention, your real authenticity about being in the US market, you set up a US entity. I can't tell you how many times I've had US people, companies say, wow, you guys have a Delaware C Corp. You know, you're legit about doing business here. Now, it's really easy to set up these companies, especially as a virtual entity from day one, but it demonstrates that you are really legit about wanting to engage with the market, and that carries a lot of weight on a credibility basis. Next slide, please. Adrian.
I am trying and it's not letting me for some reason.
Yeah.
Give me one sec. There you go.
There we go. Corporate structures. Broadly speaking, and again, this is a very high
Can everyone
level.
please mute?
Sorry, Blair. Can everyone please make sure you're on mute? Your computer's on mute. Thank you.
The types of entities you can have in the US, there's generally two types. We have an LLC and a C Corp. Now, LLCs are marketed really heavily and they're a great corporate vehicle established or invented essentially in about 1975 in Wyoming. So they're a fairly new kind of corporate structure. And we look at limited liability company or limited liability corporation. We think that's exactly what we want. In general, it's not in general. And that is because an LLC is what we call a pass-through entity, which means that the LLC itself isn't filing taxes as the owner, the members of the LLC that are filing taxes on behalf of the LLC. Now, again, as I mentioned before, if you're trying to keep Australia out of the taxable jurisdiction of the United States, having an LLC means that Australia must be filing taxes on behalf of the LLC. So you're exposing yourself there if you've just got an LLC set up as a pure subsidiary entity. There are some situations where you do want an LLC, but literally that's 2 to 5% of our client base. The majority of our clients who need to have an entity on the ground in the US to be able to sell their products nationally, to be able to employ people nationally, to be able to operate across the country, a C Corp is a much better entry model to get into market. A C Corp is also what the majority of VCs will be looking to invest into if you're looking to gain VC income in that way, VC capital. So C Corp's what you want to be looking at, not an LLC, all right? LLCs are great if you're a US tax resident. If you're like a US tax resident, you want all the protection of a company, and company protections still work in the US as opposed to Australia, then an LLC gives you all of the company protections without the additional tax burden. It's almost like having an individual ABN, to give you some context there. But again, C Corp's the cleanest, neatest structure, especially if you're coming into market to explore it in the first instance. Next slide, please. I'm not going to touch on this very much, but as I said, 50 countries. You've got to understand that each state has its own rights, its own taxes, its own laws. You know, if you want to employ somebody in a state, you have to have an employment agreement governed by that state. If you're operating in any state in the US, you're creating an income tax liability in that state. So if you go into the US and want to set up in 4 states from day one, you're going to have quite a high administrative and compliance cost. All right. This is why, in general, we always recommend setting up in Delaware as the first sort of landing pad in the US. Delaware has the oldest book of corporate law in the United States. It has the strongest company protections in the United States. There's a reason why NASDAQ-listed companies are incorporated in Delaware. It also has, because most people don't operate in Delaware, they don't have people there or property there, or a product sitting there. Delaware levies a very tax efficient, or a very efficient tax system called a franchise tax, which basically is levied on the number of shares that you've issued in your Delaware C Corp back to your Australian company. So if you're setting up that virtual entity in Delaware as that first port as a service entity for your Australian business, so that it can sell products in the country, it can start to identify where you want to operate, where you want people, where you want property, then you're literally paying a franchise tax around about $500 a year in terms of costs just to have that entity there. So once you're in Delaware, you can then decide, where do I want to operate? Where do I want people? Where do I want property? Where do I want warehousing, etc.? And you take your Delaware company and you register it as a foreign corporation in the other states in which you wish to operate. And the reason this is advantageous is, let's say you want to employ somebody in California. If you incorporate your company in California to begin with, to employ that person in California, you are always registered in California, which means that if that person then is not the right person in California and you find somebody in New York, you have to register your Californian company in New York, but you'll always be paying taxes in California. You won't be paying $500 a year as you do in Delaware and registering in New York to have that person. You'll always be paying Californian tax. So Delaware gives you that landing pad that's virtual that allows you to scale across market really efficiently. Next slide, please. Taxes. I can talk about this for hours. I'm not going to. The most important thing to understand here is that you're going to have 2 kinds of taxes. Income tax and sales tax are usually the 2 that are going to hit you up front. Income tax is federal income tax and state income tax. You're registered in Delaware, you'll have franchise tax and you'll have federal income tax. Anywhere else you're registered, in order to have people or property elsewhere across the United States, you'll have state income tax as well. And the point here is not that the income tax liability itself is going to drain your coffers. The point is that you have compliance costs here. If you've got 10 people in 10 states, you've got 10 income tax filings. And the income tax filings, $1,000, $2,000 each, that's a huge impact on your business, especially if you're slowly growing it in markets. So having Delaware and scaling out slowly across market allows you to manage your cash flow and manage your costs in country. The other is sales tax. Of course, if you are selling your products into a state and you trigger what's called a sales tax nexus, then you'll be required to register for sales tax, file sales tax returns, and pay sales tax. Sales tax nexuses are different from state to state. There are some commonalities. You know, you'll have, in general, $100,000 worth of product per annum. If you're selling into a state, will trigger a sales tax nexus in that state, and you'll be required to report sales tax there. Some products are exempt from sales tax. SaaS products are still exempt in about half the states across the United States. Medical devices are often exempt. But again, it is something you have to consider downstream after establishing your business and starting work there. Next slide, please. Legal and practical requirements often differ. I always put this in here. This is relevant to banks as well. With respect to my learned colleagues, bank compliance rules do change with a certain frequency. It does mean you need to be on top of that. You do need to satisfy KYC requirements at your banks on an ongoing basis. We've had mixed experiences with a number of banks, not the 2 that were on this call at all, obviously, but some of the other banks have been quite brutal in simply pulling accounts from clients because their compliance rules have changed and they no longer want to support them. And that can be really challenging. So be prepared that the landscape often can change and you need to move with that landscape as it changes. The other point is that legal and practical requirements. You often what the law says you need or do not need does not mean that it's fit for purpose in terms of what you need to operate your business. So, you know, having somebody on the ground in the US representing your business is a massive leg up in getting a lot of things done. Legally, you don't need a resident director, but having somebody on the ground who can represent your business will make a whole lot of things easier, from managing your tax liability all the way through to doing practical things that need to be done, like applying for employer identification numbers. Next slide, please. Very quickly, get it right. Get good advice. Don't try and be clever. we've had way too many horror stories of clients who've been in breach of their visa, and the consequences have been deportation and a black mark on your passport that you can't come back to the US. So if you are planning to do any kind of business in the US, make sure that you're entering under the correct visa. All right, we don't do them, but obviously we know a bunch of people who do. But make sure you get the right advice and make sure you follow the terms of whatever visa you're under, so that you don't run afoul of the authorities. Next slide, probably banking. Employment. Put banking at the end. Employment's also really critical. We don't do employment, but again, consider whether it's better for you to send a founder of your business over to the US to set it up and to run it, taking all of your corporate culture, all of your corporate knowledge with you. There's a definite advantage in doing so by that way. Of course, it's more costly. Of course, you have visas. Of course, you've got a lot of other things to worry about. But you can essentially migrate a lot of your business to the US in doing so. The alternative is to hire somebody in the US who can represent your business, which has, again, certain circumstances, certain businesses, these models will suit you. We went with hiring someone. It was really good for us, but there's a risk associated with it. Are they the right person? Are they focused on your business? Are they carrying your corporate culture? So finding the right person is critical, whether it be sending a founder or finding somebody in market. Banking, really quickly, which will be a nice segue. I hope banking's the next, otherwise I'm misrepresenting. Bingo. Banking can be painful. It can be painful worldwide. The US actually is a whole lot easier. It's almost on par with our experience with Australia. Places like Singapore, nightmarish. The UK, hellish. So believe me, it might be painful. When I say it can be painful in the US, it's nowhere near as painful as a lot of other markets in the world. Local representation is almost always necessary to get an account open. You need somebody who's representing you in the US to open that account. The USA can have surprisingly primitive infrastructure compared to Australia. The fact that so many payments are still done with checks in the United States does make it challenging. We have digital banks versus bricks and mortar banks, which we're going to speak to. And as I said, sometimes we find that clients come in with a digital bank to begin with, but then need a bricks and mortar bank account in order to facilitate whatever ongoing business they've got, be it being able to receive checks, be it that they want to attract VC capital. There's a number of different ways that this can be approached. And as I said, we run both solutions because both solutions have different advantages for us at our particular journey in the United States. And be aware there are always prohibited, I say prohibited industries, I don't know what the exact nomenclature is, and you can ask my colleagues here, but prohibited industries, restricted countries. We do run afoul. A lot of our clients coming out of Asia, sometimes there are certain countries that are having ultimate beneficial owners located in those countries will just simply mean you can't open an account at a lot of banks. Similarly, prohibited industries, helping marijuana-related businesses into the US has been really difficult because, of course, marijuana is federally restricted in the US, even if it's state legally. And, of course, banks are federally regulated. And so, we've had a lot of clients who have had products that have applications within the cannabis industry. And as soon as, that's on the website, and as soon as that's on the website, it can cause problems. So be aware that, you may, depending on your particular industry, or depending on where your UBOs, your ultimate beneficial owners, are coming from, may also create complications in the process. Next slide, please.
Got about a minute left, Blair.
Beauty. Only one more slide. We're done. Case studies. Look, these are some case studies I can talk you through. Each of these, are clients that we've had, SaaS clients here that we've said no initial need for personnel or payments via subscription model on website. A lot of them have been able to use digital banks to facilitate what they need to do with their business. We talk defense. Similarly, we've got a lot of clients who go to the US simply to get an employer identification number, the equivalent of an ABN, to engage with the Department of Defense. And they've been able to do so at that stage with like a digital bank a lot of the time. Energy tech, we've got a major client whose biggest clients are the two major energy suppliers in Texas and California. They've got people on the ground, they're receiving check payments, they're looking for VC capital. They have set up a bricks and mortar bank because that facilitates more effectively their growth at that particular stage of the journey. And similarly, a homewares company, we had a homewares company that was engaging with Walmart, and they were selling $1 million of product a month into Walmart. And Walmart said that was below their threshold for electronic funds transfer, $1 million a month. So you can see that they were paying with a check. And that created a lot of challenges for them with digital banks, and they found that a bricks and mortar bank was easier. That's about it. I've glossed over a lot there because I really want Sara and Tammy to speak to the up-to-date opportunities that exist with their two separate banks in this space. But that gives you some idea that you can see here those case studies are entirely different in terms of their objectives, their operating model, etc., and how that has driven their solutions that they've sought in terms of banking. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thanks, Blair. Much appreciated. I could listen to you for hours, my friend. That was fantastic, and I hope you all got a lot out of it. And you did hear it first, as Blair said. Don't try and be clever. Here I have been all my life trying to be clever. Now I know I don't need to anymore. So on that one, I'm going to hand over to Tammy while I bring up your slides. Tammy Olmsted is the Director of Channel Partnerships at 𝐤𝐤𝐻. Rodney and Evan, if you don't mind just popping your screen off, that'd be fantastic. And just a reminder for everyone to make sure your mics are off as well. Give me 1 second and I will be pulling up presentation in a second. Right, Tammy, over to you.
Thanks, Adrian. Cool. So do you have this in PDF? Yep. Okay.
Yes.
Let's see how this goes. I've not seen it in PDF, so bear with me. Blair, thanks. Obviously, it's great to have one of our partners on the call and one of our customers to speak about, I suppose, real life of using 𝐤𝐤𝐻. But my name is Tammy Olmsted. I look after partnerships for Australia and New Zealand for 𝐤𝐤𝐻. And I'll just take the next, 9 or 10 minutes just to give a brief introduction as to who we are, what we do, just to give you a little bit more flavor as you're kind of looking for different options in terms of banking into the US. And a massive thanks, Adrian, for having us here today. So next slide. 𝐤𝐤𝐻, if you're not familiar with us, we are a Melbourne-born company, so really proud to have Victorian roots. And we've been around for about 8 years now, and really this is our mission. So to really help businesses go global much more efficiently, much more cost effectively. And so I suppose where we spent the beginning kind of our journey was really building this kind of robust infrastructure layer and then setting out on top of it a very easy to use kind of WebEx experience for our users. But building out, working with local banking partners around the globe, that could be JP Morgan, ANZ, Visa, Discover, Amex, to build out that infrastructure and really start to connect these local banking partners to have this infrastructure that we could then take advantage of. So if we go to the next slide, please. I say this is kind of our We're a Real Business slide. I won't run you through like all the details here, but just to really call out maybe that middle number on the left. So 𝐤𝐤𝐻 processes over $50 billion US per year. And I think that speaks to really the robustness now of our platform. So if you kind of look in that lower right-hand corner, these are some of the businesses, obviously, with Acclime that trust us with their money, really. So, we have the likes of Xero, we have Brex and Rippling, well known in the US, Shein. And yeah, I think that speaks again to kind of where we're at now in terms of the different types of businesses, from very small to medium-sized businesses all the way up to now enterprise type businesses. Next slide, please. Cool. So let's talk about, you're an Australian business, you want to go overseas. Blair's talked to you about, some of the things that you need to think about from that, like setting up a business perspective. But obviously, as his kind of first point was, you need to figure out either how you're going to get paid or how you're going to pay out. So if we go on to the next slide. From an 𝐤𝐤𝐻 point of view, we kind of see these three things as major problems we're trying to solve. International banking is a nightmare. I would say different levels of nightmare depending on the destination. As an American, I can say I still can't believe we use checks in the States, but it is the reality. And just opening up of those accounts can be really challenging. I think about a previous startup I worked at. I had to send our founders over with all the documentation, for example, to the UK to open up an account. Whereas if we would have had 𝐤𝐤𝐻 at the time, it would have been so much easier. So we're really looking to solve that. We see a lot of businesses, even small businesses, that are using lots of different platforms to manage their finances. And there's lots of great point solutions out on the market, but we really want to be that end-to-end solution. So you can kind of have that visibility all in one place. And then just, I think, probably most people on this call would know, whether that's from a business perspective or even consumer perspective, it's costly to move money around the world. So if we go on to the next slide, this kind of talks a little bit about, how we're trying to solve these challenges. So one, really our raison d'etre in terms of starting a business was to help businesses go global. Our founders were, buying things from overseas, figuring out it was really expensive. They, saw lots of businesses wanting to expand, really challenging. So we make it much easier to open up an international market. So if you think about Airwallex, if you're an Australian business, you open up your Airwallex account, you're going to obviously go through all the regulatory checks to have that open. But once you have that open, you're going to fund that with your Australian dollars. That's going to be your home account. In a few clicks, you can have a US dollar account, and that is a local US dollar account with our banking partners in the US. You can then immediately give that to any suppliers you need to receive US dollars from. You immediately can move over money into your US dollar portion of your Airwallex account to then pay out. So making it super, super easy. It's, you don't have to go over to the US and kind of go into a bank to open that. As we talked about, we also want to be an end-to-end solution, which I'll talk about in the next slide. And then just really, where Airwallex started was really helping save money on those international fees. So with that kind of global infrastructure we've now built, about 90% of our transaction happen on local payment rails. And why that is interesting to you is that means those are free or virtually free, rather than, for example, paying a SWIFT fee, which sometimes can be, $25, $30 to transfer money from one currency to another. And about 70% of those funds land the same day, and about 50% of those transactions are instant. So just making it a lot faster, a lot cheaper to move money or pay people as you need. Cool. Next slide, please, Adrian. So this is really a good, hopefully, visual representation of the Airwallex platform. So as mentioned, we want to help businesses not have to use multiple different platforms to manage their finances, because A, it becomes quite costly, B, your lack of visibility becomes really challenging. And we'll speak to small businesses. They might use 4 or 5 different platforms, and that becomes really challenging. So this is kind of how we look at Airwallex. We help you kind of all the way from collection over to spend. On the collection side, just to kind of give a little bit of flavor about the platform. So first of all, you're going to have those global accounts, which is what we talked about. You open up your Australian dollar account. You can then instantly open up a US dollar account, a GBP, a Hong Kong dollar account, and then fund those accounts. And that's basically, you're having now a global wallet. You have full visibility of the overall amount into that, but then you can partition off different currencies if you obviously have the need for that. We can also help you with getting paid. So if you're an e-commerce business, for example, you want to have a payment gateway on your website, we have that functionality. We have lots of APIs. If you have kind of more robust development teams and you're building your own website, we can help you with that. And we can also help you with payment links. So if you have invoices you're sending out, you want to stick a payment link on that rather than someone typing in your bank account details and maybe getting that wrong, we can help you there as well. The managed piece is what we talked about, the wallet. And then on the spend side, obviously then we help you pay out. So our transfers product, if you have, for example, a US supplier you need to pay, you would use our transfer product for that. We also have in Australia Visa debit cards. So these are really cool kind of for 2 reasons. So one, we have company cards, which would allow you, for example, if you have a lot of subscriptions, maybe you're paying in US dollars for different SaaS products. Every time, whether you would see it or not, you're getting a foreign transaction fee for those. If you use our borderless cards and hold a USD portion of your wallet, for example, you can use that card to negate that 3% fee for every SaaS product you're paying for. And then probably more interesting is you can use those cards also then to issue out to employees for expenses. So we have an expense management layer built in. And because Airwallex is the issuer and acquirer for the cards, you get real-time visibility into what your employees are spending. So rather than, I think about kind of previous lives, I might have used my own card for expenses. The process of a reimbursement was really challenging. So I maybe waited like 3 months to kind of put in all my expenses. You can then start to see real time what people are spending. We make it really easy for them to capture and manage their receipts and upload them. And then lastly, we have introduced a bill pay product quite recently, and this is exactly what it says. We help you upload, go through approval process and pay bills, and you can now batch transfer multiple currencies kind of in one go and make it really easy and reconcile obviously to your accounting system. Cool, next slide, please, Adrian. This is just a snapshot. I won't go into the detail, but this is basically on the left, on the right, what you would see if you were an AirWallex user. Great visibility into actually if you're transferring money to someone or within your wallet, how much you're going to actually end up transferring over. So we show you our interbank rate, we show you our markup, which is a 0.5%, our 50 basis point FX fee, and how much is going to land into that account. So no surprises. Next, probably 2 slides. So just a quick case study. I'm not sure how many people are familiar with Mr. Yum, but again, an Aussie, a Victorian born company. They've now merged with Me and You, but they are a digital menu platform. They're really popular in Australia. They wanted to expand into the US and to the UK. And kind of when doing so, and I was actually worked for their competitor, and we did the same things. I had the same challenges. Going into those markets became really challenging very quickly. We were trying to hire into those markets. We needed obviously to have a way of getting paid, bringing the money in from the hospitality venues, paying them out with the portion of that needed to get paid. So if we go into the next slide, this is basically how Mr. Yum used AirWallex to make this a lot easier. So they were already an Australian dollar account holder. So then they were able to quickly open up GBP, US dollar accounts, use our FX payout functionality to then whether pay out or collect funds in those currencies. And then they also used the card product. So again, they were employing people overseas, issued them cards and made it very easy to understand, what expenses were getting paid, and saved about 50K. They estimated once they kind of made these changes for what they were paying previously in SWIFT fees, etc., and very expensive FX fees. Next slide. Next slide, sorry. And then I think this is really important just to very quickly talk about how AirWallex protects funds. So if you're an Australian entity, an Australian account holder, we have two layers really of fund protection. So the first one is we're ring fencing your accounts into a separate account from AirWallex, our own funds. So your funds are absolutely not being used for any of our operational processes. They are ring fenced. But then they're safeguarded as well with a guarantee. So we will actually hold the amount in your account. We will hold the same equivalent amount in a bank guarantee. So if it's $10 or if it's $1 million, that will be held in that guarantee that's managed by a third-party beneficiary. And what that means is, obviously, in the unlikely event that something was to happen with AirWallex Australia, you would then be able to work with that third-party beneficiary rather than us managing those bank guarantees. It's managed by a third-party independent beneficiary. So I think it's important just to really touch on that. Obviously, my legal team gave me a caveat that there are, as you have a more complex business, there's different things that come into play. For example, if you do have a US entity, you'd be under the jurisdiction there, but we can obviously talk through those. And then if you have any questions afterwards, really happy to connect you with some of our team to talk through your particular kind of needs and wants and see how we can help you. Right. Thanks, everyone.
Great. Thank you, Tammy. Thanks for all that information. Very, very interesting. And we'll provide people's details after the fact as well. So last panelist here, Sarah, I'm going to hand over to you to introduce yourself. For those that don't know, Sara Rona, Managing Director, Head of Europe, MENA and ANZ for Silicon Valley Bank. So I will just load up your slides, Sarah. Give me a moment.
I promise I'll try to keep it to 10 minutes because I know we have some Q&A after this.
It's all good.
But hi, everyone. So thank you so much for joining us today. And huge thank you to Adrian and Brian from Global Victoria, as well as Blair and Tammy. Obviously, love to see Mr. Yum, who's one of our clients as well. Such an amazing story. It's been an incredible session so far, and I'm just excited to chat with you all about SVB. So by way of background, Blair touched upon this a little bit, but my name is Sara Rona. I'm based in New York. So as you can imagine, my time zones working with Australia are a blast. I head up our Australia, New Zealand, MENA, as well as our UK Europe portfolio for SVB. And I've been covering ANZ for about 3 years now. So it's just been amazing seeing the growth in the ecosystem from the $10 billion high in 2021 to the region really leading the charge in climate tech. ANZ is a huge core focus area for us here at SVB, and I'm just quite excited to be meeting with you guys today. Next slide, please. So as it pertains to SVB, we're the Bank of the Innovation Economy with focus on tech and life science. I'm sure you're all aware, or if you weren't aware before, you are aware now that we went through a bit of a bumpy period last March. So in the US, we were acquired by First Citizens Bank, where we've been operating as a completely separate entity since March last year. We're basically just leveraging their balance sheet that combined now we've got enough liquidity to cover insured and uninsured deposits by about 300%. And we've gone back to being the top 14th bank in the US by asset size. So from just Q2 to Q4, we've made over 500 new loans in the US, totaling about $3 billion in loan commitments to new and existing clients. So we've been really, really busy despite the little hiccups. So we remain really dedicated to the success of our investors and innovators who are quite literally inventing the future for us. And now we've got the full backing for Citizens, which has been in business for 125 years and are incredibly stable for us. So needless to say, SVB is operating as the SVB you know. The only difference now is that our international offices didn't come part of the acquisition, and instead we're actually taking care of those clients within my group. So next slide, please. So as for my role in this, I'm part of a team called Global Gateway, and we're a dedicated international business development team that supports startups, scale-ups, and VCs around the world. We've worked with international clients for more than a decade across all stages and sectors, and focus on helping them navigate the challenges and complexities that arise in their expansions to the US. It's really no small feat. Our team's mission is to empower visionary high-growth companies like yourselves, and by helping with all the cross-border banking needs as you're trying to navigate the US. So we can help get banking accounts set up, but we also do everything from pitch deck reviews, for example. But most importantly, I think our sweet sauce is really plugging our founders into the local ecosystems. So we really love being a partner to international companies so they can really hit the ground running whenever they do get to the US and focus on running their businesses instead of all the administrative tasks that Blair talked about earlier that really comes with making this way over the Pacific, or I guess in my case, across the Pacific and across the country. And to Blair's point earlier around US and foreign entities, SVB can actually onboard non-US entities as well. And we don't require you to come into the bank like some of the other brick and mortars. Next slide. So these are just some examples of how we've been working with the ANZ ecosystem for the last couple of years. So these are various events that we've participated in, from Blackbird Sunrise Conference that we sponsor, Innovation Bay events down under, events like these in the US, like SaaStr, Denver Tech Week, Climate Tech Week. We've been incredibly plugged in, and a huge shout out obviously to Global Victoria, the other trade orgs like NZT and Austrade that we've all been partnering with. It's been really amazing to kind of see that. And our goal is, I talked about earlier, creating this innovation ecosystem is plugging our founders into these community events, having you really participate in different webinars and resources that we have. We've done some that are quite tailored to the pain points of Aussie and Kiwi expansion over to the US, and I'm happy to share those afterwards. And next slide. These are some other ways that we add value for our clients. So we've got, a deep understanding of the tech ecosystem, which positions us as a really valuable partner for companies that are looking to scale and just navigate the complexities of that tech industry. Our goal is to be a partner and provide customized banking solutions for every stage of your growth. So ideally, we start working with companies at those early stages and grow with them as they need more and more complex banking services. And I think next slide. I think that's actually it. I did this quite fast. But yeah, happy to take some questions. Blair and Brian can share or Adrian and Brian can share my contact information afterwards. But yes, happy to be a resource.
Great, thanks so much there, Sarah. I'm just going to check to see if there's any questions in the chat first before I kick off. But Does the digital banking solution enable localized transactions, meaning direct to employee bank accounts, payroll providers, suppliers, and contractors directly? So that's for you, Tammy, potentially.
I'm just going to clarify that with Glenn. Are you talking about direct debits? Yes. Okay.
Yes.
So it depends on each market, to be honest. And in the States at the moment, we're working on two pieces. One is direct debit, and one is, as Blair mentioned, checks. We're able to create checks if you're a US entity actually today to pay out, but we can't accept checks in. So these are two things that we're working on at the moment.
Next question, I think it's back to you, Tammy. Can I ask the main differences between Airwallex and Wise, if you can answer that?
Sure. Leah, I actually might send you something that has a really good synopsis actually afterwards. But yeah, I think, look, Wise is a great platform, and it really depends, I think, on what you're looking to do and how you're setting up. But I think for us, sorry, I'm just losing my, I'm just taking a note. I think what I'll do is I'll send that over because there's quite a few things that we can call out for Wise and Airwallex.
I was gonna say, Tammy, from our perspective, Airwallex is Australian, dare I say Victorian. So, but I mean, from our side, that's been good because we've had people on the ground. Maybe you do have this overseas, but we've had people on the ground here who've been able to help us with Airwallex instead of dealing with Wise, where you're often shunted to somebody overseas in a different time zone. So, if I had to pick between digital banks, I'd always try and find something that's local because it's just they're going to be more attuned to your requirements.
Yeah, fair.
I've got another question for anyone to almost answer here. A US client is purchasing our product via USA-based finance leasing company. They are wanting to pay directly into a USA bank account only. Is this common practice? We have an Australian bank account with USA foreign currency account. Is this not a usually recognised as an approved account? Blair, you're acknowledging, so do you want to?
Yeah, I was going to say I'm not surprised, but that's not peculiarly a US. There's a lot of companies, a lot of countries that will only want to pay to a domestic account rather than a US dollar account held overseas. So I'm not surprised by that. It's one of those drivers that pushes you towards getting bank accounts properly set up in the US. Because you're often, people, suppliers, vendors, etc., can often be quite idiosyncratic about how they want to do business, and oftentimes in any country you're in, they want to pay to a domestic account, not be shifting funds overseas.
Yeah, and I think it's probably worthwhile calling out the Airwallex US account that you would open is a local US account.
Gotcha. Tammy, I don't know if you've seen that other question. Do you see Australian customers having an Airwallex account for both their Australian parent and US subsidiary? Or is it just one account?
Yeah, you could do. So say, for example, you were early stage, you're starting out, as Blair mentioned, you might not set up an entity yet in the US. So you could have your Australian account and just have the US portion of your wallet. And then as you grow, you might then want to expand and create an entity in the US. And you could then onboard with Airwallex US and hold that as well. And those accounts would be linked.
Gotcha. Question for you, Sarah. Bricks and mortar bank, is there a need for local representation? Is that a director, a US-based director?
So not at all, not for banking, only for venture debt whenever there's financing components, just because of, underwriting that risk. But we can onboard Aussie entities without needing anyone in the US. We just need a W-8 form and certificate of incorporation. But really our goal is to be a partner for Aussie companies that are planning on raising from US investors or having revenues from the US, but, having that cross-border banking lens. But yeah, it's relatively easy. We can get a bank account open within 3 to 4 days, unless it's fintech, then that requires, I think, like 2-3 weeks of due diligence, but otherwise it's relatively quickly.
And to give a shout out to Sara there, look, they're unique in my opinion in this space, because most of the other sort of mid-tier banks will require somebody to be in the US to be at least there to represent when opening the account. So they have an absolute leg up in that space.
Thank you, Blair.
Hold on. Tammy, there is another one for you. If you're happy to answer, it is, how would you compare Airwallex to Payoneer?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing would be around the fees. So, you know, and I obviously don't want to speak for Payoneer, and I could appreciate some of the things that changed, but, you know, Airwallex is not charging you to open up an account. We're not charging you kind of quite substantial fees if someone's paying by a credit card, for example. So I think the fee piece is probably one of the biggest. You know, they offer a lot of the same functionality, but the fees would be definitely a standout.
Awesome, thanks. All right, any more questions before I jump in with a couple? You can just pop your screen on or hand up or anything if you want to do that quickly. Otherwise, I'll ask a quick couple of questions before we sort of wind up. No, all good. I'll go to you first, Sarah, then I'll go back to the same question for you, Tammy. First question and subsequent question, very similar. Who's an ideal client for you in terms of an Australian client, and is there a client you would say no to? Two questions.
I can go first. So I typically work with VC-backed companies, just wanting to understand that they have, you know, enough ammunition behind them to really be able to scale into the US, because our goal is really to be that cross-border banking partner for them. So I would say I'm pretty sector agnostic and stage agnostic. I typically get companies from, I guess it depends on the regions, but from Australia at that pre-Series A stage that are looking to make their way over to the US. But yeah, I typically look for VC funding unless they're like a repeat entrepreneur with like a crazy exit. Otherwise, that's typically the criteria we look for.
And would you say no to anyone, or is that sort of wound up in that same question?
I would nicely say no to someone who has, you know, who probably doesn't have any VC backing at this stage, or really, really early stage. You know, I think that's when I would tell them to come back to us whenever they're ready. But the thing is, they really have to think about what they're looking for a banking partner. For us, we're really focusing on this high growth and trying to help them scale. And so maybe at that stage, I might not be the best partner for them. I'll answer the question on Mercury afterwards, but if Tammy, you want to answer your...
I'll jump to you, Tammy, for that same question.
Yeah, so Airwallex, we definitely serve kind of from both ends of the spectrum. So a sole trader, a small, medium-sized business, all the way up to, we have different, it's not the same product, but we have different products for our enterprise size clients. A good example is we power Qantas Business Rewards, so their business reward program with our embedded finance solution. So we can really solve kind of, I think, the gamut. I think if you're a business and you're banking solely domestically, we might not be that interesting for you. Obviously, we have products in terms of our card products, etc., and if that's of interest. But if you're not necessarily moving money globally or needing to pay out, I think most businesses today are. But if you're not, maybe we're not going to have a massive kind of suite of functionality for you. In terms of who we would say no to, it's probably more to Blair's point earlier in terms of restricted type of companies. So we obviously have a lot of banking partners globally. We work with them very tightly in terms of, who they're happy also to have onboarded. So for example, we say no to crypto, we say no to gambling, things like that. And you can find more details on the Airwallex website if you have questions about very specific industries. But that's probably, I would say, really in terms of that. It's, it might be more down to risk and compliance than size of business or anything like that.
Great, thanks. Thanks very much. Sarah, if you want to jump in on that question about Mercury.
Yeah. And then actually plus one to Tammy's points around the industries. I mean, we're pretty similar in terms of crypto, sanctioned countries, all that stuff. We definitely have to abide by similar regulations. Mercury. So Mercury is really interesting. I think that there was definitely an opportunity when things happened with SVB for a lot of different fintechs to, come in and save the day, essentially. What we've seen, I'll just be frank, Mercury is not a bank, so they're still a fintech, and so that FDIC insurance is not on that front end. And so I think it's still relatively risky. I mean, we don't obviously anticipate anything like March happening ever again, but it's just different. SVB offers, a full suite of banking products and services that are FDIC insured. And so it's just, it's different. Everyone has a different business model. And so, yeah.
Thank you. And lastly, Blair, just I want to hand over to you just to give some lasting thoughts just in terms of avoiding mistakes. So I know that's a massive question, but if you can give your 1.5 to 2 minute version of just really important considerations in and around banking specifically.
Yeah, look, I mean, I always say this, I know it seems blasé, but do your homework. Look, Australians can be particularly naive. I hate to say it, but we can sometimes, and especially when we're looking at the United States or the UK, because we think, hey, they're just the same as us. So surely it all works the same, and it doesn't often. So, you know, make sure you do your homework. Make sure you explore every option that's available to you, but ask the questions. You know, the challenge sometimes is that as a service provider, and I'm sure my colleagues here would agree, you start to assume that people often know things, you know what I mean? So don't ever think there's a silly question. Ask the question, clarify in advance. It's really the best advice I can always give. There's a hell of a lot of free advice out there. You've got you've got Global Vic on here that is swollen with free advice. You can certainly go to them at any time and ask them questions. Use these resources that are available to you to get the information you need. Don't just do an internet search. Ask the question. To spend time with peers, ask other people how they've done it. Get different opinions. Dig down into it. Don't just believe the rumors. You know, oh, that doesn't work. You know, don't just believe random comments. Look into it further. Understand why somebody's made that comment. You know, do your homework. Dig into it. Ask the questions. Don't rush.
Yes, thanks so much for that, brother. And I want to pick up on just one point you spoke about then, just in terms of, you know, pick the brains of your peers. That's probably an important one, and just sort of leads a little bit to us at Global Vic. And, you know, we put on these events so you can hear from obviously experts in their field and providers of specific services that you may require at a point in time. But aside from that, you know, any events we run, our programs are all designed to bring like-minded and like companies and companies seeking that sort of expansion to get together, because there is a lot you can learn, both on what they've done right, what they've unfortunately also what they've done wrong. So it's a really important point. You're not alone in this. There's plenty out there. You are asking for help, asking a question. It doesn't take too much at all. And I saw your message come through. Leah just asked about, you know, you've got probably 1 million questions for Blair, and that's great. Not for this session, unfortunately, but what I will say is we will circulate everyone's contact details, so you can feel free to reach out if any of them might be appropriate for you.
Adrian,
for Blair. Yep.
Sorry, Adrian, I was just going to say, just before everybody logs off, to that end of connecting with people, if anybody's going to South by Southwest in a couple of weeks, we're hosting an event on Sunday, March the 10th from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m, the Tipsy Alchemist, where we get together all of the Australians, New Zealanders and Kiwis and Brits, I beg your pardon, who are coming into South by, as well as the local community. So we do this event specifically so you can ask questions if people are there. You know, what did you do? How did you get a driver's license? Where did you get your bank accounts open? Where did you find an appropriate office space, etc. So if you are going to be at South by, give me a holler. Because I
actually met Blair at South by Southwest 2 years ago or 3 years ago.
That is indeed the truth. So if you're going, let me know. I'd be happy to have you all at our event.
Awesome. Thanks, Blair. And yeah, definitely reach out. So on that note, and we're literally right on time, first time that I've ever hosted something but where it's been finished even close to time. So a testament to the professionals we've got on the call. But I sincerely want to thank Blair, Sarah, Tammy for their time that they've given up their time in preparation for and the webinar itself. Invaluable. And from my engagement with all three, I hand on heart put my trust in them that they can help you if needed. So please feel free to reach out. Really appreciate your time. There will be a recording of the event available down the track, which I'll let you know of. Keep an eye out for future events that we're hosting. I'll reach out when they're appropriate. But by all means, thank you for your time attending as well. I know it's an hour is very important, but I'm hoping it's been valuable for you. So thanks everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, Adrian.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.